Marco Bellini sat in the corner booth, a ghost in his own kingdom. The restaurant, his restaurant, hummed with the low thrum of money and power. Men with thick necks and watchful eyes stood by the doors. They did not look at him, but they saw only him. Everything in his world was an extension of his will. The wine, the food, the silence. He was 70 years old. A lifetime carved from stone and silence. He had built an empire on loyalty and fear, two sides of the same tarnished coin. His hands, now resting on the starched white tablecloth, had signed orders that ended lives and forged dynasties. They were old hands, spotted with age, but still steady. Very steady. Leo, his lieutenant for 30 of those years, sat opposite him. Leo was a man who understood the architecture of silence. He knew which silences were peaceful and which were the calm before a storm. This was neither. This was the silence of a long, unchanging Tuesday. Then the bell above the heavy oak door chimed. It was a sound of intrusion. A note out of key. A woman stood in the doorway, hesitating. She was not of this world. Her coat was worn, her hair a soft silver halo under the dim, expensive lighting. She clutched a thin, worn handbag to her chest like a shield. She looked lost. Frightened. But her eyes, a pale, determined blue, swept the room with a purpose that defied her posture. Marco's men tensed. Two of them moved to intercept her, to gently but immovably guide her back to the street where she belonged. Marco raised a single finger. Not a gesture of command. A flicker. The men froze. They had never seen him do that before. Not for a stranger. The woman's eyes found his booth. They locked onto him, not with the deference or terror he was accustomed to, but with a strange, desperate familiarity. As if she was looking for a landmark in a forgotten city. She took a hesitant step forward. Then another. She walked through the valley of hushed conversations and averted gazes, her worn shoes silent on the plush carpet. She walked directly toward the most feared man in the city. She stopped at his table. Her breathing was shallow. She did not look at Leo. She did not look at the bodyguards who were now statues of coiled violence. She looked only at Marco. "Marco," she asked. Her voice was a thread, thin and frayed, but it cut through the decades. Marco Bellini, a man who had not been surprised by anything in half a century, felt the ground shift beneath him. Ilara. He had not spoken her name aloud in 40 years. He had not heard it spoken. But it was etched on the inside of his skull. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, crumpled manila envelope. It was thick and uneven. She placed it on the table between them, next to his untouched glass of wine. Her hand trembled. "This is for the roses," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all I have. Please." "You have to stop." Leo stared, his professional mask cracking for the first time in memory. He looked from the old woman to the envelope, then to his boss. Marco Bellini did not move. He did not breathe. He just stared at the woman who had shattered his world 40 years ago with a gentle no, and who had just returned to shatter it all over again. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is a story 40 years in the making. It's a story about promises, and power, and a love that refused to die. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video and hit that subscribe button. It truly helps us to keep bringing you more content. And I love hearing from you, so comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now, let's get back to the story. 40 years dissolved in an instant. The clatter of the restaurant faded into the scent of damp earth and blooming petals. He was no longer Marco Bellini, the bull of Broad Street. He was just Marco, a 30-year-old man with more ambition than sense, standing in the back room of a small flower shop. Rosalia Floral. It had been her father's shop. It was her whole world. He remembered the way the moonlight cut through the grimy window, illuminating the dust motes dancing around her head like a halo. He had just closed a deal that had made him. He was no longer a street kid, he was a player. He felt invincible. He had a ring in his pocket, a simple gold band he had paid for with his first clean money. "Marry me, Ilara," he had said, his voice raw with a sincerity he would never feel again. "I'll give you the world." She had looked at him, her pale blue eyes full of a sadness that terrified him more than any rival's threat. She had touched his face, her fingers cool like petals. "Oh, Marco," she had whispered, and in that whisper, he heard the closing of a door. "You don't have the world. You have a war. I can't live in a war. I can't raise children with the sound of sirens in their ears. My world is here. It's quiet. It grows." He had tried to argue. He had pleaded. He had told her he could protect her from his world. "But who will protect me from you?" she had asked, so gently it broke his heart. He had left the shop that night a different man. The part of him that believed in quiet worlds and growing things had been walled off, brick by painful brick. He never asked another woman to marry him. He never spoke Ilara's name. But he made a promise to himself. A silent, unbreakable vow. Her world was flowers. Quiet. Growing things. He would make sure she was never without them. The first delivery was a dozen red roses. Then a weekly standing order. Every Tuesday, without fail, a bouquet of the finest, freshest flowers would arrive at Rosalia Floral. No card. No name. Just the flowers. For 40 years. 2,080 weeks. The roses never stopped. Now she was here. Older, worn by a life he had not been allowed to share, but still her. The same determined set of her jaw. The same eyes that saw straight through the monster to the man. And she was asking him to stop. This was the one thing he could not do. Marco slowly came back to the present. The hum of the restaurant returned. Leo was watching him, his expression a mixture of confusion and profound concern. "Leo," Marco's voice was gravelly, a machine unused for too long. "Leave us." Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second. An order to leave his boss's side, especially when a stranger was present, went against every instinct. But the look in Marco's eyes was not one of command. It was a plea. Leo nodded slowly. He stood, gave a slight bow of his head to Ilara that was both respectful and wary, and walked away. The other men in the room, seeing Leo's retreat, understood. They melted back, giving the booth a wide berth, creating an island of privacy in the middle of the crowded room. It was just the two of them. As it should have been. "Ilara," he said. Her name felt foreign on his tongue, a ghost of a word. Tears welled in her eyes. "You remember." "I have forgotten nothing," he said, and it was the truest thing he had ever spoken. He looked at the envelope. It was lumpy, soft from handling. He could feel the small, desperate collection of bills inside. A tithe paid to a god she did not know. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Why now?" She took a shaky breath, gathering her courage. "I can't accept them anymore. It was always a kindness. A mystery. I thought maybe it was someone my father had helped. But it's gone on too long. I can't afford the charity." Her words were a knife twist. Charity. He had never seen it as charity. It was a vigil. An offering. A testament. "It is not charity," he said. "Then what is it?" she pleaded. "I have to sell the shop, Marco. I'm losing it. Everything. My father's legacy. My home. It's all going." A cold, hard knot formed in Marco's chest. The shop. Rosalia Floral. It was more than a building. It was a sanctuary. The one place he had ever felt unarmed. "Sell it?" he asked, the word sharp. "Why?" "A developer bought the building. He's tripling the rent. He wants everyone out. He wants to tear it down. Put up one of those glass boxes," she gestured vaguely with her trembling hand. "He's been threatening. Sending men. Telling my customers the shop is closing. Scaring them away. A different kind of silence descended on the table. This was not the silence of memory. This was the cold, flat silence before a killing frost. Marco's world had rules. Simple, brutal rules. You do not hurt children. You do not harm the innocent. And you show respect. This developer, whoever he was, had broken all three. He had targeted an innocent woman. He had threatened her livelihood, which was her life. And in doing so, he had disrespected something that belonged to Marco Bellini. Not the building. Not the shop. The memory. What is his name? Marco asked. The question was quiet, but it landed on the table with the weight of a tombstone. Gallo, she said, her voice small. Vincent Gallo. Marco nodded slowly. He knew the name. A small-time parasite, trying to play in the big leagues. A man who mistook cruelty for strength. He looked at Ilara. He saw the 40 years of hardship and quiet dignity etched on her face. He saw the girl in the moonlight, the woman who chose a world of growing things over his world of war. And he saw that her world was now under siege. His war had finally come to her door. He reached out, his old, steady hand covering hers where it rested on the table. Her skin was still cool. She flinched for a moment, then relaxed, a weary surrender. "You will not sell the shop," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. "I have no choice," she whispered, tears finally tracking paths down her cheeks. Marco looked into her pale blue eyes. The same eyes that had rejected his world. Now, she needed it. She needed the man she had turned away. She needed the monster. "Yes, you do," Marco Bellini said. "Tonight, you have a choice." He slid the crumpled envelope across the table, pushing it back toward her. "This is not the payment I require," he said. She looked at him, confused. "Then what? What do you want?" Marco thought of the 40 years of silence. The 40 years of roses. The empire he had built on the ashes of his own heart. What did he want? He wanted to turn back time. He wanted the 30-year-old boy's belief that he could conquer the world and still have the girl. He wanted a life he could never have. But what he needed, right now, was... He watched her as she processed his words. He saw the flicker of hope, so faint it was almost painful to witness, warring with a lifetime of disappointment. She slowly pulled her hand from under his, picked up the envelope, and put it back in her worn handbag. She stood. "Thank you, Marco," she said, though she did not know what she was thanking him for. He watched her walk away, a small, resilient ship turning to face a storm, not knowing that the tide had just turned in her favor. When she was gone, the silence in the restaurant was absolute. Every eye was on Marco. He raised his head and caught Leo's gaze across the room. "Boss?" Marco looked at the spot on the tablecloth where the envelope had been. He could still feel the phantom weight of it. Her desperation. Her pride. "Vincent Gallo," Marco said. The name was like gravel in his mouth. "I know him," Leo said. "Ambitious. No honor." "He has made a mistake," Marco said, his voice flat and cold. "He has disrespected the memory of a good man, and he has troubled a woman who is under my protection." Leo's eyes widened slightly. "Under your boss, the woman is." "The woman," Marco interrupted, his tone leaving no... His business, his partners, his home. Find out what he loves. Find out what he fears. And then? Leo asked quietly. Marco placed his glass down with a soft click. He looked at his hands, the hands that had built and destroyed so much. For 40 years, they had served his ambition, his code, his loneliness. Tonight, they would serve his heart. And then, Marco Bellini said, "You will bring him to me." No, that was wrong. That was the old way. That was business. This was not business. He corrected himself. But the sight of Ilara, her spirit bent but not broken, had unearthed something he thought long buried. A protective instinct that had nothing to do with territory or profit. It was the memory of her father, Antonio Rosolia. A man who smelled of soil and sunshine. A man who had always treated Marco, the poor kid from the docks, with kindness. He had given him odd jobs at the shop, a few dollars for sweeping up, never once making him feel like a charity case. He had taught him the difference between a Crimson Glory and a Mr. Lincoln. This one, Marco, Antonio had said once, holding up a perfect, deep red. He was spitting on Antonio's grave. Marco looked at Leo, whose face was a study in loyal confusion. Leo had only ever known the bull. He had never met the boy who learned about roses from an old Italian gardener. The payment I require, Marco said, more to himself than to Leo, is respect. He had built his life on demanding respect through fear. But the respect Antonio had given him freely was worth more than his entire empire. Ilara, by trying to pay him back with her last dollars, had shown him that same kind of honor. An honor Gallo could never understand. This was the choice. He could send his men. It would be clean, efficient. Gallo would disappear. The problem would be solved. It was the smart move. The business move. Or he could do it himself. He could stand before this man and make him understand the nature of his transgression. He could recontextualize his own violent capabilities not as a tool of a criminal, but as the only appropriate response to a profound moral injury. He would protect her. He would become the man she had feared, to save the world she had chosen. The decision settled over him, calm and absolute. Leo, he said, his voice now firm, all conflict resolved. Cancel my appointments for tomorrow. All of them, boss. All of them. What should I tell them? Marco met his lieutenant's eyes. Tell them I am attending to a promise. A very old promise. He then made a single phone call. Not to a soldier. Not to a politician. He called the owner of the city's largest and most discreet private investment firm. The man on the other end owed Marco not for a favor born of violence, but for a piece of advice given decades ago that had made his family's fortune. Mr. Abram, Marco said, his voice polite. I have a small matter of real estate I need you to handle for me. The building at 14th and Elm. I want you to buy it. Today. There was a pause. Marco, that's a commercial property. It's not on the market. Everything is on the market, Marco replied. The owner is a man named Vincent Gallo. I am certain he will be motivated to sell. Pay him whatever he asks. Double it. It does not matter. The ownership is to be transferred to a blind trust. Effective immediately. Consider it done, Marco. Is there anything else? Yes, Marco said. The tenant in the ground floor shop, Rosolia Floral. Her lease is to be rewritten. $1. For 100 years. And the property taxes are to be paid in perpetuity by the trust. She is not to know the details. She is only to be told that the new ownership is sentimental. A sentimental ownership, Abram repeated, a note of understanding in his voice. I see. I will handle it personally. Marco hung up. He had just spent a fortune he would not even notice was gone. He had mobilized his legitimate power, a muscle he rarely flexed with such personal intent. That was for Ilara's future. Now, for Gallo's. Leo, Marco said, standing up. The restaurant fell silent again. It is time we paid a visit to Mr. Gallo. He needs to be taught a lesson in horticulture. Leo, finally understanding the depth of the situation, simply nodded. The car is ready, boss. The plan was simple. There was no need for complexity. Vincent Gallo lived in a glass house of his own, a sterile penthouse apartment overlooking the... He was a man in his late 40s, dressed in clothes that were too expensive and too tight. He radiated a cheap, desperate arrogance. I don't care what it takes, he yelled into the phone. Demolition starts Friday. If the old lady in the flower shop is still there, that's her problem. He turned from the balcony, still ranting, and froze. Marco Bellini was standing in his living room. Gallo's face went through a rapid series of colors, from tan to pale to a sickly green. The phone slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the polished marble floor. Who are you?" he stammered, though his eyes screamed that he knew. He had seen the pictures in the papers, the old file photos. The bull. Marco did not answer. He walked slowly around the room, his old shoes making no sound. He took in the soulless modern art, the chrome furniture, the distinct lack of anything living. Not a plant. Not a flower. A man's home should reflect his soul, Marco said, his voice a low rumble. Yours is very empty. What do you want? Gallo asked, trying to find his footing, trying to project an authority he did not possess. Money? I can give you money. Marco stopped in front of him. He was a good foot shorter than Gallo, but he seemed to take up all the air in the room. I am not here for money, Mr. Gallo, Marco said. I am here to talk to you about botany. Gallo stared, uncomprehending. Botany? Flowers, Marco clarified. Specifically, the flowers at Rosalia Floral on 14th and Elm. Recognition, and a dawning, sickening terror, flooded Gallo's face. Look, that's just business. The old lady, she's behind on the times. The building is worth more without her. Her name is Ilara, Marco said, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The shop was her father's. His name was Antonio. He was a good man. He worked with his hands. He grew things. He taught a young, stupid boy the difference between a rose for love and a lily for sorrow. Marco took a step closer. Gallo instinctively took a step back, his bravado crumbling. You see, Mr. Gallo, you have misunderstood the nature of that property. You thought it was dirt and bricks and plumbing. An asset on a balance sheet. You were wrong. Marco was now inches from Gallo's face. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. That shop is a memory, he whispered, the words full of a cold, ancient fury. It is a promise. It is the last remnant of a world where things of value were not measured in dollars. And you, in your greed and your ignorance, you tried to bulldoze it. He pointed a single, steady finger at Gallo's chest. You did not just threaten a tenant, Mr. Gallo. You threatened my history. And there is nothing in this world I protect more fiercely. Gallo began to tremble. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who she was. You knew she was a woman, alone, Marco said, his voice laced with contempt. You knew she was vulnerable. And you thought that made her weak. That made her a target. That is why you are a man without honor. And men without honor do not last long in this city. Leo stepped forward, silent and efficient. He held a briefcase. You are going to sell your building, Mr. Gallo, Marco said calmly. You are going to sell it tonight, for a very generous price. Then you are going to pack a bag. You are going to leave this city and you are never, ever going to return. You will not contact your partners. You will not say goodbye to your friends. You will simply vanish. And if I don't? Gallo blustered, a last, pathetic attempt at defiance. Marco smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. It was the baring of teeth. Then Leo will help you pack, he said. The implication hung in the sterile air of the penthouse. The threat was not of a beating. It was of a permanent resolution. A problem that would be solved in a way that left no loose ends. Gallo looked at Marco's ancient, weary eyes. He saw no mercy there. No room for negotiation. He saw only the finality of a decision made 40 years ago in the moonlight of a flower shop. He collapsed into one of his expensive, uncomfortable chairs. Okay, he whispered. Okay. The matter of Vincent Gallo was closed. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that was, in one small but significant way, cleaner than it had been the day before. Marco did not go home. He had Leo drive him to the small park across the street from Rosalia Floral. He sat on a cold bench as the sky lightened from black to grey to a soft, hopeful pink. He watched the shop. His shop. Her shop. At 8 o'clock, just as she had for 50 years, Ilara arrived. She unlocked the front door, her movement slow and deliberate. She paused, looking up and down the quiet street, as if expecting trouble. Then she went inside. Marco waited. An hour passed. Then another. He was a patient man. Around 10:30, a delivery truck from his own private florist, the one that supplied the weekly roses, pulled up. 2 men emerged, carrying a truly obscene amount of flowers. Not just roses. Lilies, tulips, peonies, flowers of every shape and color. They filled the sidewalk. Ilara came to the door, her face a mask of confusion. The driver handed her a clipboard. Marco saw her shake her head, saw her try to refuse the delivery. The driver pointed to the instructions. Paid in full. For the next 100 years. Marco watched as, slowly, hesitantly, she allowed them to bring the flowers inside. He saw her touch a yellow tulip, her expression unreadable. He had kept his promise. The roses, and more, would not stop. It was time for the final piece. The reunion. He stood up from the bench, his old bones aching, and crossed the street. The bell above the door chimed, the same sound that had heralded her arrival in his world the night before. The shop was an explosion of life and color. It smelled like heaven. His heaven, at least. Ilara was standing in the middle of it all, a single white rose in her hand, her back to the door. I don't understand, she said to the flowers. I just don't understand. Antonio always said white roses were for new beginnings, Marco said softly. She spun around. Her eyes were wide. She was not afraid. She was bewildered, overwhelmed. Marco! What have you done? I attended to a promise, he said, walking toward her. He stopped a respectful distance away. He did not want to crowd her in her own sanctuary. The man? Gallo, she started. Will not be troubling you again, Marco finished. The building has new ownership. They are sentimental. She looked around at the sea of flowers, then back at him. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture she had never imagined. This is you, she whispered. The new owner. The roses. It was always you. He simply nodded. There was no point in denying it. Not anymore. She took a step toward him. Why, Marco? After all this time. Why? He had rehearsed 1,000 speeches in his mind over the decades. Speeches about regret, about loneliness, about the wrong path taken. But looking at her now, surrounded by the quiet, growing things she loved, he knew none of those words mattered. Because you asked me to, he said. I asked you to stop. No, he corrected gently. 40 years ago, you asked me to protect you from my world. I failed. My world came for you anyway. So I did the only thing I could. I brought my world to bear against it. They stood in silence for a long moment, the scent of 1,000 flowers wrapping around them. She finally broke the silence, her voice small but firm. Are you a good man, Marco Bellini? It was the question, wasn't it? The one he had never dared ask himself. Was he a good man or a bad man? He had been both. He had been whatever was required. No, he said with a raw honesty that surprised them both. I am not a good man. But for one night, for you, I think I was allowed to be. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the crumpled manila envelope she had given him. He opened it and let the contents spill into his hand. A few $100s in small, worn bills. A queen's ransom, offered in desperation. He held the money out to her. I told you this was not the payment I required, he said. She looked at the money, then at him. Then what is? Your courage to come and find me, he said. Your pride that would not let you accept what you thought was charity. You gave me back something I thought I had lost, Ilara. A reason to fight for something other than territory. He closed his hand around the bills. This is worth more than anything in my vaults. He walked over to the old-fashioned cash register on her counter, the one that had probably belonged to her father, and rang up no sale. He placed the wad of cash inside. A down payment, he said. For the next 100 years of roses. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of release. Of a burden finally, inexplicably, lifted. I can't accept this, Marco. You can, he said. And you will. Consider it back pay for all the years of worry. He turned to leave. He had done what he came to do. The memory was safe. She was safe. Marco, wait. He stopped, his hand on the door. She crossed the space between them and did something she hadn't done in 40 years. She touched his face. Her fingers were still cool. Thank you, she whispered. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the contact. It was a benediction. An absolution. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It had no name, no company. Just a single phone number. His private line. He pressed it into her palm. If the new ownership is ever anything but sentimental, he said, you call this number. If a storm knocks a branch through your window, you call this number. If you run out of sugar, you call this number. Do you understand? She looked at the card, then at him, and for the first time, she smiled. A real smile. It lit up her face and erased 40 years of winter. I understand, she said. He nodded, gave her one last long look, and then he was gone. The bell chimed his exit. 1 year later. Rosalia Floral was thriving. It had become a landmark, a small pocket of impossible beauty in the ever-changing city. Ilara had hired 2 assistants, young women who loved flowers as much as she did. She laughed more now. Her back was straighter. Her eyes, once clouded with worry, were a clear, bright blue. Every Tuesday, a magnificent bouquet of red roses still arrived. She no longer wondered where they came from. She would simply touch a petal, smile, and place them in the window for the world to see. Across the city, in a sterile office high above the streets, Marco Bellini sat behind a vast mahogany desk. He was signing papers, moving empires, conducting his war. He was still the bull. Stone and silence. But on the corner of his desk, held in a small, simple silver vase, was a single, perfect white rose. A fresh one was delivered every morning. A symbol of a new beginning he had never expected to have. And tucked away in his wallet, behind the credit cards and the emergency cash, was a small, pressed red petal. It was from the first rose he had ever tried to give her, the one she had left behind when she walked away from him all those years ago. He had kept it. A memento of the love he had lost. Now, it was a memento of the promise he had kept. Sometimes, true power is not found in the ability to take, but in the unwavering strength to give. It is not measured by the fear a man inspires, but by the lengths he will go to protect what he loves. For 40 years, Marco Bellini was a king in a cold, empty castle. But in the end, a man of violence found his truest, most lasting legacy not in the empire he built, but in the quiet, humble garden he had spent a lifetime protecting from afar. It was a testament that even after a lifetime of winter, some loves do not die. They simply wait for the sun.